Hello and welcome to Newsnight. I am Ladi Akiridoluale. It's our pleasure to have you join us. As Nigeria marks 50 years of the end of the Civil War, today we focus on healing, reconciliation, and reintegration efforts and how successful they have been for the country. My guest was a soldier who fought for the Nigerian army during this period and then went on to lead the country 15 years later. Former military president, retired General Ibrahim Babangida. Your Excellency, thank you once again for your time. It's nice to see you again.
It's a pleasure.
Today, we are discussing the aftermath of Nigeria's civil war and various issues and currents that came thereafter. 50 years. Some would say it's a very long time, but there are others who would say the lifetime of a country, that's not really a long time. But I want to start by asking you to reminisce a little, take a look back. The events of the war itself. Where were you? What did you make of the whole process at the time?
Well, I was a very young officer. I think just trying to become a captain in the Nigerian army. When the war broke out, I was away on a training in UK, but I stayed there for a very short period, and then we came back. I got posted to one division of the Nigerian army then, and it's a lot of things I could remember very well. We served together with people from other parts of the country, and suddenly you discovered that you are fighting against one another. I can recall one of my very good colleagues. We faced each other, and I saw one of them died. It was a very horrible experience for a young officer at that time. Somebody with whom you trained together, we went to India Military Academy together, and then suddenly in July of 1967 we found ourselves fighting one another. It was a very, very pathetic experience, and it's something I pray that we never experience this thing again in this country.
At that time, what went through your mind? I mean, did you, for example, think, what was all this in aid of anyway? I mean, these, as you just pointed out, these were colleagues and friends on the other side. In other words, these were brothers in the country. And then all of a sudden, you had orders to fight them.
It just shows you how, or it showed us how things could go wrong in running a country. There were some civil disturbances which began to manifest itself at that time. Immediately after independence, elections were not going properly, riots in various parts of the country. This culminated into the civil war. And so the leadership at that country at that time believed very strongly that nothing should be done to break the unity of the country. And we were all brought up and trained to believe that we should be able to defend the integrity of the country. So any effort to disintegrate the country, we will resist it because of training and political indoctrination.
Did you get a sense of relief? And I'm using that word when it was declared over.
Yes, a lot. It was a great sense of relief. I was somewhere in Okigwe when my commander, General Tiwad Njuma, came and broke the news to us that the war is over. It was a big sense of relief. What I wanted to do immediately, I heard about that. On my front, there was a colleague of mine. We trained together in Kaduna in the Nigerian Training College, as we call it at that. I really wanted to see him so that we shook hands, and he eventually turned up and we greeted ourselves, talked about our days as cadets and so on. And jokingly, he said, "Ah, Ibrahim, is you fighting me?" And I said, Amos, it's the same you fighting me on this. But we have every reason to thank God that none of us was killed during that war. And we became friends again.
Now, in the aftermath of the war, the government of which, um, of General Gawan, I mean, put in place a plan for reconciliation, reconstruction, and rehabilitation. Uh, I want to assume you were part of that.
Yeah.
And what was the thinking, in your view, behind that? What was it supposed to achieve?
Well, I think we were informed enough to know that quite a number of countries in the world, we studied military history, went through civil wars. And immediately after the civil war, you come back again, settle down, and get to integrate people into the mainstream of the society. And this is what was in our mind. And fortunately, our head of state then, General Yakubu Gawan, imbibed this, the three R's. He was a passionate believer in the unity of this country. So I think having finished the war, since he said there is no conquer,
No victor, no
no
vanquished.
victor, no vanquished. So we quickly began to adjust to remain as Nigerians and be part of Nigeria.
Now, what was the state of the military at that time?
It was small in size, very. When we started, the military was not more than 5 battalions, not up to 10,000. By the time the war is over, it was about 250,000 because of the obvious mobilization and so on. So from a small number, about 10,000 to 250,000, the immediate problem now was to reorganize the army into a much more manageable size, cohesive and well-trained and well-oriented for the purposes of building a stronger nation.
And as a point, just as a point of interest, all of you, all those who were in the Nigerian army at that time, uh, your colleagues, your subordinates, your seniors, till today as we speak, no one can talk to any of you about the unity of Nigeria.
No, we saw it. The unity of Nigeria, as far as we are concerned, was an article of faith amongst my generation. Nobody would like to see this country going through another civil war. Nobody would like to see this country disintegrated because we would be unfair to those who put their lives on the line and died for the purposes of keeping the country one. If we let it go, we would not be fair to them. Millions of thousands of people were killed, a lot were maimed, some were permanently disabled, and so on. So we shall not be fair to those people who laid their lives for the sake of this country to get the country. That's why we have that belief. We are very passionate about it.
Now, how far do you think we've come along the road of those 3 R's? Are you satisfied with how far we have come 50 years on?
I think we quite frankly, I think we did. Again, if you compare other countries that went through a civil war, you find that we have done reasonably very well indeed, because by about the war was finished in 70, and the first we had military governments, then civilian governments immediately after the war. The military government from 1970 up till about from 1966 to 1975, and then another military government from 1975 to 1980 or thereabout.
79
79, and then a civilian administration 79
to 83.
to
83?
83, then military from 83 to 84, then another military 84 to 93, and now we succeeded in keeping the civilian administration in place. This is all thanks to the military for its determination to install a democratically elected government in the country.
There will be those who argue that many of the policies that were put in place in the immediate aftermath of the war, things like the NYSC, the unity schools, otherwise known as the federal government colleges, and so on, were deliberate policies designed to bring about cohesion and the issue of Nigerians not seeing themselves first as ethnic groups, but as Nigerians. If you take a look at it from then till now, has that objective been largely achieved?
To a certain extent, I think we have succeeded in, especially the NYSC program, because most of the people who went into NYSC are students from universities and other tertiary institutions. They were intelligent enough, they read enough about what happened, and they are able to go through history, intermingling. So it was quite easy. It was a very good thing that was done at that time. So if you find the generation of 1973 till now, they are mostly very strong believers about the unity of this country. So that's one thing that thing has succeeded. And then at the secondary level, at very young age, the people in secondary schools were taught about the country, about the civil war to a certain extent. So they grew up with history in their minds about the country. I think it was good for the country.
Now, there are those who will ask or who will make the comment that on a personal level, most Nigerians have moved on from the Civil War. Many have intermarried. Things have become very complicated. Most children who were born after 1970 are usually, more often than not, the product of two parents from different parts of the country. and that now those ethnic cleavages that existed prior to then are not so easy to make out now. It will be very hideously complicated to draw out ethnic groupings in fine lines as you could possibly.
During our time,
Indeed.
I agree.
Now, if the Nigerian populace has moved on, why is there so much emphasis then on government? Why do you think people want government to do things to enhance national unity if the people themselves have moved on?
Well, I think old habits die hard, they said. And the environment changes. Um, there had been this tendency to recline and go back to the old habits. If you suddenly find yourself, let's say in politics, for example, um, people tend to recline back into their own cocoon, because we didn't have what I will call a reorientation about what politics is all about. The unity, we saw it from fighting to remain united. We didn't do much in trying to get people to indoctrinate them through political interactions and the rest of them. So the moment you reintroduce politics, the first thing that came to our minds were what political parties and political system used to be before the Civil War. You saw that as a starting point. And once you see that, you could hardly change it.
Some people have suggested that we do things a bit more drastically.
How?
They pointed to Rwanda. Rwanda had a genocide, what was called a genocide in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Rwanda is about maybe 1% of Nigeria in
Mm.
terms of population, but uh, they had a genocide and a lot of their people were killed. And in the aftermath of that, the government that came into power there abolished ethnic groups. So there are no Hutus or Tutsis or did any other kind of, everybody is just simply Rwandan, and this is backed by law. Now, do you think that could work here if we were inclined to do something like that?
I think in the case of Rwanda, I would say that is leadership. They have a very strong person as a leader who believes very strongly in the country and therefore would like to see the country united, like a lot of people who went through this problem before, civil war or tribal wars for that matter. It is the leadership that could change the the whole environment.
So you don't think something that drastic could work here?
No,
Why?
but if you get a strong leadership at the state level, at the national level, I think we should be able to do it.
Even here.
Yeah.
Now, you have been part of government, you've led government in this country, and people talk about the fact that those who look in from outside may think that it is easier to do than it apparently is. Here you have what 500 ethnic groups plus, depending on who you ask.
Hmm.
Maybe the same number of languages, people with various cultures, understanding of what are advantages and disadvantages for them, and yet they're led by one person. What was your experience in that regard?
Well, I think it is like saying if when Kagame was there, you gave an example of
Yes.
Kagame, then you should build supporters who believe strongly in what you are trying to do. And we tried it in the example you gave earlier about NYSC,
The unity schools.
unity schools, and so on and so forth. I think we didn't push it hard. we should have pushed all those harder, so that you don't have people can sit down and say we met at Unity School together. And these are people from different parts of the country. So they have no problem in interaction. They don't revert back to their cocoons and say this is where I belong to. If I went to school with you, Ladi, okay, yes, he was my classmate, he's in Lagos. I have no problem going to Lagos because I know you are there. And neither the same thing, you too know that you have somebody in Mina with whom you went to the same university or did NYSC together or secondary school. I think we allowed it to slacken a little bit.
Now, one of the other things that was done to ensure this cohesiveness of the country was Abuja. The selection of Abuja as the federal capital, right in the middle of the country, supposedly doesn't belong to anybody in particular, and those to whom it might have belonged were moved out, so nobody can claim to be an indigene or a settler. You actually effected that movement in 1991. Do you think it's worked?
I think it did. Don't forget the whole idea of Abuja came about in 1975, I think, or 1976, during Murtala Muhammad. He had a vision because of the sheer size of the country, a lot of ethnic groups in the country, and he wanted to keep the country one, so that they have something they call their own. Everybody belongs to that. I think the idea was good, and this is the whole concept came about in 1976, and those of us who came after Murtala Muhammad believed very strongly that that vision was the correct vision for this country. And so we pursued it, including even the civilian regime. Sheikh Shagari tried to make it realizable, even if it is symbolically. And then when the military came, because we believed in it very strongly, we worked to make sure that it remains what it is designed for.
Now, there are those who say that the Nigerian military and Nigeria as a country mirror each other. If the Nigerian military is cohesive, strong, united, the rest of the country has no choice, because the military, apart from bearing arms, comprises of representatives of all those people. And they can actually enforce what it is that they do within their commands on the rest of the country. I know it sounds simplistic, but I don't know if that how it sounds to you.
No, I think this is the way, the thinking is correct. You know, you cannot convince me, for example, that this country should break. I wouldn't talk to you for a long time if you tell me that, because I know people died keeping the country one. I got wounded trying to keep the country one. So anybody who says so. So my generation will always insist that this country should remain one. We fought for it. We knew the consequences of war. We know the pains people went through in keeping the war. So if the little we have to give is to keep the country, it's not too much demand on us to keep the country together.
Now, you are in touch with a lot of those colleagues of yours that I mentioned. They come to visit you. I raise this because of this point of national unity. When things seem to be dicey, you all come together. You have discussions.
Common purpose.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you take a decision, even as retired officers, and implement it. But then there are fears that if anything were to happen to that group, there's no other group coming up.
Well, this is why I said the whole thing depends on the leadership selection. One of the things I would have loved to see is if you want to pick up a leader, you should be able to assess his thoughts about the country, about the unity of the country. He will not jeopardize it. He will try to use everything within his power legitimately to make sure that the country remains one. If you have, there are 200 million people in this country. There are some people, my generation, generation below me, who will always believe in this country. And those generations will move this country towards the required objective.
So as you're speaking now, you're assuring those who have raised this point have raised that it's not going to go with your generation.
No, my generation is committed, and they will use everything possible, apply logic, advice, talking, just to make sure that the country remains united.
As you say that, my next question is actually going to be about the subject about military-civil relations. That's an area that's also been contentious because the military bear arms, and the myth or the story goes that they are not trained to interact with civilians. And most of the time when these interactions take place, they usually end with the civilians getting the raw end because the military brooks no dissent. They don't entertain arguments and so on. They take orders.
That was the military of before. Immediately after the Second World War, what you said is true. But we are becoming more civilized. We are becoming more educated. So it's all in an effort to understand how the military works, and for us to understand, because we are preparing to make sure that the soldier knows that he is supposed to be obedient to a democratically elected government, because that represents the people, democracy, the whole concept of, so that the soldier will not come. I can tell you now, only a stupid soldier will think of a coup d'etat, because this is outside their head, it's no longer in their psyche, it's no longer acceptable in Africa, in West Africa, and in the world generally. So the soldier is intelligent enough to know if he stages a coup, for example, the country will be ostracized in the world community of nations. Uh, there can be an uprising. The people you wanted to defend will rise against you in your own country. So the soldier is no longer fashionable. So this is close, and this is all as a result of civil military relations. And the institutions have helped quite a lot in providing this.
Now, going forward, before I take you to any other thing, what would you like to see done to speed up this deepening of national cohesion, healing, reconciliation, reintegration, and so on? Because 50 years on, there are still people who believe that, the country is not fully reintegrated. There are some people who are senior to others. There are some people who are being discriminated against. What would you like to see? What do you think should or could be done to hasten or deepen this process at this point?
Our selection of leadership is the most important thing. Leadership at all levels, political leadership, military leadership, and economic leadership. Once this is strong and everybody on this sector believes in this country, I think we will have no problem.
Do you think that the federal character principle, which was another thing that was introduced to deepen this kind of process, do you think that has worked?
To a certain extent, I think it did, because it created some sense of belonging, balance in what governments try to do. But you cannot carry it on to a ridiculous extent because of federal character. You take a mediocre to do a job. It shouldn't be. Now we have reached a stage where in virtually every part of the country today, in any community, there are always graduates, people who hold master's degree or professionals. So you cannot sacrifice uh, quality in the name of federal character and put on somebody who does not qualify at all.
Now, history, you've mentioned it once or twice already in this interview, is critical for any nation that seeks to develop, so it is said. Um, those who have the information, who have the knowledge, need to pass it on. When you and I sat here, the last time I was here, um, I asked you about the book, and you said you were thinking about it, and that in fact you were going to look at it more seriously, even though at the time you expressed the fear that people may think less of it because of uh, some of the things that happened during your administration. What's your position now? What do you think of the book now?
Well, I think I just learned to belong to the school of thought of Winston Churchill. They are talking of historical legacy. He said history will be fair to him because he is going to write it himself. So maybe because I share this, I will write it, God willing, so that I write it myself, so that I want the history to be fair to me.
I know you're also a big fan of books. You were known, you're reported to have read about really world leaders and not just contemporary ones, older ones, Hannibal, uh, General Douglas MacArthur, and so on. Why?
Because Douglas MacArthur was a very brilliant man. In fact, he came in immediately after Second World War. Very professional, very charismatic, and strictly professional. So those of us who believed in the profession, we see him as a good example of. Hannibal was, you see, when you talk about a tough man, the older military, we say that is not the weapon, but the man behind the weapon. So despite all the problems, he has been able to lead people. People follow him because he's not going to put them astray. Those are the sort of characters we had at that time. But this time, what they were, you don't need such people now. You need people who can use their intellect to convince you that this is the right thing to do. And you follow him because you know he is not going to take you astray.
Now, let me bring you to the current state of security challenges in the country. The last time I spoke to you, we also discussed this. At the time, you talked about the military being overstretched. Now, between then and now, the security challenges seem to have, depending on who you talk to, increased or metamorphosed from one type to another. Um, what have you been hearing about the state of our security?
I think a lot needs to be done, quite frankly, because if what we read in the papers or listening to in the radio is true, there are still some challenges in most of these areas that we assumed the security situation has been stabilized. We still hear, I read in the paper the young governor in Borno telling the defense minister that there are still a few places that people can't go within the state. Now, I'm glad he said so because that at least will give the military high command some way of thinking. The governor is the security officer of the state. He is more with the people. So there are still a lot of challenges. What they need to do is to get a lot of intelligence information. It looks to me that there are people who are thinking for the, what do you call them?
The insurgents?
The insurgents. There are people who think for them. And the thinking is we need to find out who are thinking for them, who are leading them, and who are even supplying them with weapons and ammunition to put a stop to that. That is probably the way I assess it now. This is what is happening.
But the last time we talked, you talked about the military being overstretched because many of these
No, it is still
challenges,
overstretched. It's still overstretched.
because now they're even talking of withdrawing them from some of these things, possibly for that reason.
Yeah, to get the police to do the job
Right.
is probably to do that. That's why most of the job they do under normal circumstances is the job that a policeman should be doing. The military only intervenes when it has gone beyond the policeman, and there is a process that makes you take over from the police. So if they said they are going to get the police to take over, I think they are trying to, naturally, they will get more policemen, they will equip more policemen, they will train more policemen, so that where it gets really tough is where you get the military to go in.
Now, some people are taking a different tack. Uh, just recently, the Southwest governors launched a kind of security initiative.
Atomeke or something?
Amotekun.
Amoteku.
Now, a few hours before this interview, the northern governors said they were going to do the same thing.
That's typical Nigerian.
And the eastern governors, too, say they are going on with Operation Ogunigwe.
And then remaining south.
Right. Now, is this, I mean, you are probably the right person to ask this. Is this viable when there is a national security force in place as well?
If you say viable, I will say no, because they are quarreling with minimum pay. Now you create another force that you must equip them, you must pay them salaries, you must give them all the welfare they need. That is going to be a problem for the states. Where are they going to get the money to do that? If they had succeeded in convincing the federal government to put up some part of the revenue for the purposes of that, I can understand. But if they take it on themselves, is going to be a problem.
Do you see in any way there being an overlap of functions between such initiatives and the already existing security forces who
Yeah.
are in any case already on ground in many of those places?
That's right. I think what they need to do is to have a closer look at this. We have a lot of security outfits. You have the army, the police, the mobile police, the National Defense and Security, and NDSC. You have them all over. I think it's get them and assign specific responsibilities that will take away the burden of uh, stretch. They wouldn't be stretched if you carve out responsibilities for them and make sure that that is what they do. If they have to change, then there is a process has to be followed. In other words, if the police can't do it, then there is a process that the army can now be asked to go in because it has gone beyond the police.
Uh, Taking that as the peg, there are those, I mean, also recently, there was the multinational task force that was dealing with the Boko Haram challenge, involving Chad, Niger, the Cameroons, and so on. But recently, Chad
Has withdrawn.
has withdrawn, and it is said that Chad was the most effective of the fighting forces because they have seen terrorism and the like up close even before it came to our own shores. I take that as a peg to ask that when you were in government, you took the issue of regional security very seriously because I remember very clearly then Ghanaian leader Jerry Rawlings used to come to Abuja to consult with you and to Lagos to consult with you very, very frequently. The same with the president of Benin Republic, Matthew Kerikou and the others, Nasimbe Yadema and so on. Do you think that slipped at some point in our reckoning when we talk about security?
I think it did. I would have loved to see more commitment at the highest level, at the heads of state level, or at the various countries' commitment too. What we did was to look at the entire country and say, okay, Nigeria, you are the big brother, if you want to say it this way. You have more troops, so you will provide troops, you will provide equipment. Another country are very good in communication, so they provide communication, they provide this, and so on. So everybody is given certain responsibility, and then later you come and mesh them together so that they can achieve a common objective.
But don't you think we should be doing that rather instead of multilaterally or bilaterally, multilaterally using an organization such as ECOWAS, where Nigeria incidentally is the big brother as you
we led it.
That's it. But it would appear, as you said, that there is a commitment issue, maybe because the countries have different objectives.
That's right.
And then there is the usual Anglophone, Francophone
divide.
Why is that? Why does that prove so intractable?
I think it's the hangover of colonial mentality that some of these countries have, and you can't just get rid of it just like that, you know.
But it's been a long time, General.
It's been long, but not too long.
General, as we're winding this down, I can't help but ask about the Nigeria of your dream. What is the Nigeria of your dream? What would you like to see happen in this country?
A strong, prosperous, and united country.
Please go on.
A strong Nigeria, a rich Nigeria, and united.
How do you propose we achieve that?
Hmm?
How do you propose we achieve that? Knowing what you know.
By what we are doing now.
Which is?
Going, making sure that we provide the required leadership, we sing the correct songs, we indoctrinate the younger generations that there is nothing shameful of being a Nigerian. There is everything to be proud of being a Nigerian and so on.
And finally, when you sit back and you think, a lot of things must go through your mind on various things. What is the one big thing that you wish you had done when you were president that you didn't?
One big thing. To have indoctrinated you guys on politics, because we still haven't gotten out of the former mentality about politics, what it is now. We haven't learned a lot, and we established, for example, political institutions, and only for the public to come and say, no, this is military. We came up with 2 political parties. Now you have 71. So in the process, votes snatching, mass breaking of law and order, killing, and so on. And at any rate, before we did that, we carried out a study about the attitude about Nigerians. We found even after independence, we tended to gravitate towards 2 political parties in the country. You have alliances, and those alliances, 2 or 3 if you put them together. As far back as 1960s, we were doing that. So we didn't take advantage of that to make it really strong. And when we came again in 1979, 2 parties, really. Then I think 83, you have the progressives, the others, you have during our time, you have the National Republican Convention, the Social Democratic, and all these gravitating towards 2 parties. We could have been able to get them really established and give room for the emergence of a 3rd party. You put up the laws. If somebody wants to do it, the 3rd one, this is what he has to do. This is what you have to achieve. This is what you have to achieve in the country, and so on. We would have no problem. So I think the political institutions is what I would have loved to see done differently, not the way it is now.
Excellency, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's today's episode of Newsnight. Do let us know what you think of the conversation. The handles are right there on your screen. I am Ladi Akeredoluale. Thanks for joining us, and goodbye.